So let me say two things about the fall in the dollar. The market's basically debating whether this is a purely cyclical retrenchment. So we've had this U.S. exceptionalism theme, U.S. growth outperformance vis-a-vis everybody for years. Is this just kind of markets calling time on that whole phenomenon, which would be normal? Things go up and down. We've been in markets a long time. That's par for the course. But the other debate is whether the policy noise out of Washington is doing damage to the reserve currency status. And that is a much more alarming debate, and I'm amazed how many people are talking about this, and the fact that people are talking about it is a worry. Now, I think, based on flows, the situation is 90% the former, so this is a cyclical re-rating of the U.S. growth story, with maybe a little bit of a smidge of flows on the reserve currency status side, but very small.
You know, this whole thing about U.S. exceptionalism, one way I had it described to me was over the last decade or so, right? It was Trump one, it was also Biden as well, which got us to 6-7% as a deficit as a percentage of GDP, right? So now the chickens are coming home to roost, and what the U.S. is going to have to do over the next 4, 5, 6 years or so is go on a diet, right? That means growth is going to moderate. It's not going to fall off a cliff. It's going to moderate, and everybody else is going to do better. And if the value of currencies, if you believe it's based on comparative growth differentials, it basically means that everybody else is going to do better than the U.S., including their currencies, correct?
Yeah. Look, I think, so you're totally right, Martin. Currencies are relative, right? If the United States, if it gets, for example, its fiscal house in order, that will be negative for growth in the short term. However, it could also be stimulative because bond yields might fall, the market might reward the fiscal consolidation efforts, and so that could be good for growth over the more medium term. I think the bigger picture is there an alternative to the dollar as a reserve currency?
Is there?
And there is not. The Europeans are too fragmented. There are too many imbalances within Europe. Some countries are still highly indebted. Germany is really the only country, as we've seen, that's able to do fiscal expansion in any meaningful way. So the dollar is the only game in town. There is no global rival. And so, if anything, we're seeing a cyclical re-rating of the dollar, a temporary fall, and frankly, I'm doubtful that the dollar has much further to fall.
Look, dollar's reserve currency status, that's pretty safe for now. You would probably agree, though, that de-dollarization, that process is still going to continue, though?
I mean, we are, in the big picture, going to move to a multipolar world, right? There are obviously, and China is the obvious candidate, major economies that have grown and now rival the United States in size and complexity. So de-dollarization isn't really a bad thing, it's a natural evolution, but the dollar and its reserve currency status obviously rest on decades of rule of law, on property rights, on democracy, and there are very few places globally, both in terms of the size of the market and in terms of that rule of law, that can rival, even with all the noise recently, the US dollar. So again, the dollar reserve currency status is safe. De-dollarization will happen, but it's a very long-term, super slow drip.
Okay, it's over the horizon somewhere out there, though, but not tomorrow. And simply on a practical basis, in terms of liquidity, there's nothing out there that can rival dollar right now. We were talking offline a couple of seconds ago about this whole idea of a Mara Lago Accord. This is coming from Stephen Mirren's paper, right? He's head of the Council of Economic Advisors right now. And this kind of takes its cue from the Plaza Accord, which had to do with Japan. In this case, the whole idea would be to get dollar softer and to get the renminbi, the Chinese currency, stronger. What is the likelihood of that happening? Because there's another component to this as well, and that is swapping out bond holdings for 100-year paper.
Yep. So this is capturing a huge amount of attention. I've spent this week talking almost exclusively about this basic idea, this Mara Lago proposal. And the truth is that the United States, because of its reserve currency status, has a strong dollar. It is a destination for capital. But that strong dollar has a benefit, which is foreign buyers buy treasuries. U.S. interest rates are lower than otherwise. If you want to start messing with that and get the dollar down, there is a cost to pay, which is higher interest rates. If you want to jam a century bond down buyers' throats, you may be asking for a lot of trouble, because that could really cause a fiscal crisis. You don't want that. So I'd much rather accept the status quo, a relatively strong dollar and lower interest rates than otherwise. If the United States is unhappy about the dollar, fix fiscal. Get fiscal under control. Everybody deals with their own issues. It's time for the United States to deal with that.
So fixed fiscal, and this is partly at least an inherited problem from Trump 1 and also from Biden. I think we agree on that, right? What we saw happen in the House is squeaked by just a single vote. A lot of people looked at that as sort of a revolt or sort of a riot by the much more conservative part of the Republican Party. What's likely to happen in the Senate with this bill, do you think?
So I get asked all the time, how will spending cuts or tax hikes ever get through legislative bodies, given that they're so unpopular? And the truth is, fiscal sustainability is not a matter of popularity. We need leadership on this issue from the powers that be. There's lots of voices in the Senate who are in favor of that, so I'm hopeful that they would prevail. But as you said, Martin, it's super tight, and it requires leadership from the key stakeholders in Washington, and I think they really need to step up.